Good morning. My name is Nicole Donelson. I'm the Vice President of Philanthropic Strategies and Partnerships at the Central Florida Foundation. We're so glad that you're joining us here today for this great topic and conversation. We've got a great panel and looking forward to it. This is a part of a four-part series of the Role in Philanthropy. We have discussed journalism and disasters, and today we are covering the topic of the role of philanthropy in religion. I just wanted to give a reminder that this conversation is being recorded and it will be made available after the discussion. We'll be sending it out by email as well as available on our website. Throughout this discussion, if you have any questions, please feel free to submit those into the Q&A, and we will work to address some of those questions towards the end of our discussion. This time, I'd like to welcome our President and CEO, Mr. Mark Brewer.
Thanks, Nicole, and good morning, everyone. It's great to have you here. People have been asking me about this particular conversation for several weeks, so we're happy to have the great panel we have today and happy to get into this discussion. I want to start by introducing the panelists to you, and we'll start with the first one. He is a rabbi ordained by the Jewish Theological Seminary of America in 2002, where he also received his master's degree in Jewish education. As a student rabbi, he served several congregations, including internationally, but more recently, he served a congregation in Maitland until 2021. Rabbi Kay currently is chair of the Interfaith Council of Central Florida. Please join me in welcoming Rabbi David Kay. Rabbi, welcome.
Thank you. It's a delight to be here and appreciate the opportunity.
He is an archbishop and has been a senior pastor of the Hope Church for more than 20 years and is the recipient of many accolades and awards celebrating his leadership and community enrichment endeavors and his work to promote business opportunities for all. He has led the charge for transformative change in the lives of families in Orlando and around the globe, and is a highly recognized person for his work both locally and internationally. Join me in welcoming Archbishop Alan Wiggins. Archbishop, good to have you here.
Thank you so much, Mark. Excited about being here today and getting to hang out with the rest of the panelists. Thank you to the Central Florida Foundation for hosting this wonderful discussion.
We appreciate that. He's an Imam and president and senior Imam of the Islamic Society of Central Florida, and he's the president of the Muslim Social Services, which serves the larger Central Florida community. Imam Musri is a member of the Interfaith Council of Central Florida and has served for 10 years on the Florida's Governor's Faith-Based Advisory Council. Please join me in welcoming Imam Muhammad Musri. Imam, welcome.
Good morning, Mark. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me.
And she is the program manager for the Florida Nonprofit Alliance, where she's been working and volunteering in the nonprofit sector for 20 years, specializing in helping organizations grow their capacity to meet their mission through training, leadership development, strategic thinking and planning, research, and processes and procedures implementation. Please join me in welcoming Leah, Donelan, McDermott. Leah, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone.
So it's good to have you all here today. I think a generally good place to start is just a reminder that while philanthropy has several lives of its own in the universe, the core of philanthropy is really the faith-based community. Religion is the start of philanthropy. And while giving has been declining in that space for a while, it's still the largest place that philanthropy is given. And because it has both faith and training for people about how to give back to the communities they live in. It's a really important part of philanthropy in general. And so it is kind of the core of philanthropy. And so that's kind of where I want to start. I want to take a look at what you're all thinking about right now about giving and religion. And Leah, I know the Alliance has been doing some additional data collection recently, and you may have some updated numbers for us around Florida.
Yes, absolutely. And Mark, I think you're exactly right that so much of where we learn about charitable giving, especially in this country, comes from or is influenced by how religious we have been in our lives. And actually, the research that we're seeing in Florida shows that people who are generous as adults are far more likely to have been guided into those habits as children and being part of a religious community. When we do our research, we ask about religiosity. So we don't separate between the different religions. We just ask in general if people consider themselves to be religious and what that does for giving. Like across the United States, the most common category to give to for Floridians is religion. About 33% of Floridians give to religion, and 29% of all the charitable dollars in the state go to religion. So it's both a common thing to do and also an area that gets a lot of the money. An average gift to religion ranges from about $1,300 for the year for an average size household, where a high net worth household may give over $5,600 each year to religion. So it's very significant. It's very important to the success overall of charitable giving. We like to say giving begets giving, right? So if you're giving in your religious institution, you're more likely to give to other charitable organizations, which is obviously very important to the success of the entire sector. So it absolutely has a huge effect on how Floridians are choosing to give their time and their money.
And, you know, for the three faith leaders here, it shouldn't be lost on anyone that both faith and human services are hand in hand in most communities. And in fact, many human services organizations were founded by or driven by faith. Imam, because you're also the leader of Muslim social services, I wonder if you have a thought on that.
Yes, indeed. You know, especially during the pandemic, it became highlighted the greater need in the local community, and the in-kind contributions that went through our system grew several folds. And that's because people felt closer to each other, that we were all under the same challenge. And we have seen also this increase in kindness and compassion across the board as people really felt for each other. And we were all going through like a big storm. Usually we see that during literal storms and hurricanes, but for a shortened period of time. But the pandemic made it a much longer, and it still has this after effect where individuals and families have learned a new habit and felt, you know, it transformed their lives. It made them feel better about themselves and who they are. And it still has this residue in addition to the traditional ways of financial contributions.
And Archbishop, you have a long history of both building and leading significant strategies for families in the region. I wonder what your thoughts are on how that's going to look in the future.
Well, thank you, Mark. And let me just piggyback for a moment on Imam's comment, particularly since he went to the pandemic. I really had some challenges during the pandemic. I had a little consternation myself because I had never been in one before. So we was wondering how we were going to navigate through those challenging times. But I can say now in retro that the majority of our people stepped up. And I'm speaking in general for the religious community. I could see it across the environment that we stepped up. And I say that because as it relates to giving, we were now introduced to new platforms. We were literally ushered into a new platform of giving. And in some ways, that pandemic helped us out a little bit because we had been trying to get those different platforms online for the longest. But the pandemic made it essential to our existence, and to see so many people step up and to now automate their giving and to be consistent in giving. Why? Because they wanted to see the institution preserved. So back to your original comment about the religious institution being the place that really shapes our moral compass, our behaviors, our beliefs. And I was encouraged to see how the faith community stepped up and to see that it valued the input of all of the years of teaching principles and tenets that now had an opportunity to be lived out throughout the pandemic. So I believe that this is going to help us, even as we don't totally know what the future holds, but at least now we can pivot and we can now work in those different platforms to preserve the institution.
And Rabbi, I want to piggyback on that. Your leadership in the Imam's role in the Interfaith Council really is the cross sector of many faiths who come together, thinking through the act of doing as opposed to the kind of faith. And you've been a leader in that space. I wonder if you see changes in the way faith leaders are approaching philanthropy now, or in the way they're thinking about it.
Oh, well, there's a couple of things I think. One, drawing from what Leah and the Archbishop said as well, that's shaping those behaviors from childhood in faith communities. There's this sense of I have an obligation to support both my house of worship and my community, but also the needs of the broader community. I think that's been something that all of the faith traditions and worldviews represented in the Interfaith Council certainly share. Philanthropy has definitely changed in my role as a congregational rabbi. One of the things that we saw, and I've been assured that this is a trend. It wasn't just something that we noticed. There's been a shift it's probably a generational shift, really, that when you approach someone for a significant gift, whereas you might have gotten a large chunk all at once in a previous generation, now that's a little more different. Younger donors are interested in supporting, worthy causes, including houses of worship, but sort of in smaller doses, spread over a longer period of time, and that really meant that certainly the congregation that I was serving and others that I knew of as well had to readjust their fundraising strategy and their funding strategy to say, we can't necessarily rely anymore on 4 or 5 extremely generous donors. We have to kind of spread the word a little differently. The other thing that has sort of been noticed across the board is my generation raised a generation of savvy consumers. And so, my millennial child, young millennial child, is a whole lot different in the way that he approaches how he spends his money than we were. The whole shift away from brick and mortar stores to online stores. The whole idea that, when our son was 16, I remember this, he ordered a pair of boots, and this huge box arrived at our front door that had 8 pairs of boots in it. And when we asked, how are you going to pay for all of that? He said, oh, no, don't worry about it. I'm just going to get 1 pair. And if I don't like any of them, they'll pay to have it shipped back. When you grow up with that kind of financial world, your approach to philanthropy is different too, and your approach even to supporting a house of worship. My generation, certainly my parents' generation, you did it because it was the right thing to do. That's what you do. We have a generation, and now I have to say 2, following me, that is different in their approach. They want to know what their money is going for, and they want to know also what benefit accrues to them besides just the good feeling. There's positives and negatives to that,
Sure.
But I think it's a reality that we're dealing with.
When we look at generational data, There is correlation also in that first step learned in attending religious services, and that first step is tithing, right? When you're taught to tithe, you tend to take that ramp from giving to major giving to planned giving more easily than if you never took that first step. And as you look at the millennials and some of the Gen Zs, the data in those spaces indicates that because they didn't all have the experience of tithing in the same way you described, Rabbi, it's not as easy for them to make that next jump or to figure out how to do that. I'm really interested in some of the cultural elements and how they play into the role of philanthropy and religion. And each of you represent different cultural environments. But are there places in cultural experiences that accelerate philanthropy or might even cause philanthropic decline? And I'll leave that open for anybody who wants to take that.
Well, I think we the Imam already touched on, when there's a crisis or a catastrophe, that's certainly that's certainly something that galvanizes that galvanizes charitable giving, and especially through faith communities. Faith communities are quite often the first ones that want to step up and help. I and credit where credit is due. I've seen the Muslim community come forward in just about every community or even national or international crisis that's gone on. So I think that's certainly one trigger for it.
I think also just adding on to that, in the community that we serve or I serve, I noticed that we have to balance out and be very, very mindful of what's happening around us in terms of the world, particularly economically speaking. So when we're looking at inflation, when we're looking at having less discretionary funds, when we're looking at all of these tax laws changing, there's a lot of things that is a downward pressure on giving throughout all cultures. Our culture, the African American culture, has had over the years to find ways to do a lot with little. And just traditionally speaking, being able to take that little and properly invest it, to properly stretch it, is even more essential at this point. And so what we find ourselves doing is looking at financial awareness classes, teaching people how to sow and to expect the harvest, and really being firm on that tenet or that particular principle. I heard a guy just the other day said this, and it really stuck with me. Jamal Bryant out of Atlanta. He said that he was challenged by a Jewish rabbi, and he said that it's hard to teach the tithe if you don't also teach how to handle the 90%. And I thought that that was well said, particularly as it relates to my culture. And I'm only saying that because I'm in my culture. I live in my culture, but it's probably a blanket statement for all, that if you're going to teach the tithe, then you've got to also look at how do we help people to properly invest, properly give, properly look at legacy planning with the 90% that they have. What I have found is that it's taking longer to produce a tither. And so with the way the world is changing, and with the baby boomers, you know, they gave pretty much out of compliance. They kind of, they're like, I want to get to heaven. When I leave this place, I'm making sure all of my boxes are checked. but the millennials and the Gen Xers and Zs, they're giving out of not compliance, but out of concern. If this is not connecting with them, if the need is not connecting with them, then they will just wait for another opportunity, or they will attach themselves to other opportunities or nonprofits that are doing things that connect with their passion. So again, I think all of that cuts all the way across culture, but it is what I've observed.
Imam?
Well, in the Islamic culture, the idea of giving is taught, as in other faith traditions, from early age and as an act of worship. And we're taught that the more you give, the more you get back, meaning God is going to give you tenfold what you give. And that's where the tithing idea comes from. And today, especially with the younger generation, we have technology playing a significant role in exposing them to disasters across the world. And like in 2023, there were major earthquakes, like in Turkey, there was in Morocco, there was, storms around the world. These natural disasters, the younger generation looks at it as part of and as a result of climate change, an issue that they care about, and they feel they need to respond even though it's far away. And they will skip the institution, the religious institutions, and say, there are other nonprofits who are responding to what I care about, and therefore I'm going to send my dollars to these other nonprofits who are going to put it to a better use, rather than your religious institution building another building or expanding their offices or increasing their salaries. Now there are desperate people who were watching on the news who really need help immediately. And because we are in a global environment where people come from all over the world, so they are actually deciding where to send. Often they send it to their home countries or countries of birth. And our community consists of over 50 different ethnic groups, and they often care primarily about where they came from, and say, when there is disasters there, it takes priority over, the mosque getting funds for, again, expansion or doing programming here. And we do encourage that. We do support that idea that, a desperate person, a child or a woman who needs help is probably more important than the brick and mortar here for us. But with climate change, with other disasters, we're seeing that more and more dollars going that way, percentage-wise. And therefore, as faith leaders, we are trying to be creative in how to reduce our expenses and reduce our overhead, as well as find new ways to present to this young generation of donors. As the rabbi said, they don't want to pay in the beginning of the year a lump sum. They want to spread it. So when we use our CRMs, we provide them that opportunity to spread it out. We never expect them to pay it all at once. We say, put it on a monthly payment on your credit card and forget about it. And despite that, we find people calling back and canceling because, an emergency happens somewhere else, and they say, I want to send my dollars somewhere else. And I'll come back to you when I feel you are a priority again. So it's a constantly changing dynamic for us.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of data correlation for the millennial generation. that shows their giving is at about the same level as other generational cohorts, but they're more likely to give to a GoFundMe for a human that they know or recognize or see on TV than they are to give to a church or a nonprofit, because that personal connection means a lot to them. And so that is
that's another thing, Mark, is there's a flood of nonprofits, and there is ease of access to our members. People and nonprofits, they skip over the institutions and they go directly online through social media to appeal to the young generation, to get to their specific needs, and we are left to dry.
That is one of the challenges, certainly, looking ahead. So, that churches, of course, I don't want to get deep into tax law here because that'll be confusing for people. A church is ostensibly a nonprofit under the tax law, and if it's a house of worship that is a valid house of worship, you give to it, you get the tax deduction. But many houses of worship are now starting their own nonprofits to stand side by side to get more opportunity to do specific kinds of services, to your point, Imam, where they can actually tell the community what they're doing in a space and then fundraise in that particular space. I don't know how well that actually works, but it's something that's happening. And I wonder, Bishop Wiggins, you have done so much work in the space of trying to help families and trying to make sure that people have that other 90% opportunity to be transformative and sustainable. I wonder if you see a lot of that activity in the space.
I do see some of that activity in the space, but I want to also highlight something I believe Leah said at the beginning. I'm gonna change the wording, I'm gonna Wigginize it a bit, but generosity begets generosity. That's the concept. And so we try to make sure that as a ministry and as a faith collective, we're able to address many issues and partner with other organizations that may offer the expertise that we just don't have in order to make sure that our parishioner or supporter has the confidence, as well as they see the impact of their gift to us. Now, additionally, we do have some other nonprofits that have developed over the years, but we really developed those nonprofits out of need. It was very difficult for someone coming to the ministry and then having to go back to a home that was dilapidated, and they just could not really make ends meet. And so we ended up forming a separate not-for-profit to concentrate specifically on housing and economic development. And out of that, we've been able to provide shelter, affordable housing, attainable housing through that nonprofit. And yes, it does have an appeal to some of the philanthropic gifts that are out there and supporters that are out there that have a heart for providing housing. The same thing with Frontline Outreach. We inherited that organization, which really concentrates on youth, but now, ironically, and given this conversation, it has pivoted due to the pandemic to have a concentration on technology, because we discovered that the children of this day is born with a cell phone in their hand. And so you cannot communicate with them if you're not willing to get into that digital space with them. And so Frontline Outreach is that particular entity that's been around for 50 some years that really concentrates on decreasing the digital divide. And it has an appeal for some of those donors or those people who really have a heart for technology and don't see it solely as a threat. They see it as an opportunity. And I think that that's something that the faith environment, we have to, or we choose to step up in that area and integrate technology and embrace it and understand it so we can properly use it as we move into the future.
Yeah, Rabbi, I think to the bishop's point, there is a personal kind of relationship through technology with younger generations that is not the same institutional relationship that older folks may have with their houses of worship. And so it's not just technology for technology, but I think it opens the door to having a one-on-one relationship with people. And that's something that that's a change, right? A congregational guy like you, that's a big difference, right?
Yeah, it's huge. And as my colleagues mentioned, I was still a pulpit rabbi when the pandemic hit. And we had a very, very steep learning curve with a very, very short period of time to try and continue to provide service for our congregation, for our community. My denomination is fairly traditional as observance of the Sabbath, so we had to kind of work our way around all of that as well. How do we do things that ordinarily we wouldn't be doing because it was the Sabbath, but now if we want people to participate when they're sitting at home and the building's shut down except for the clergy in an empty sanctuary, now what do we do? So yeah, we all had to learn a whole lot in a very short period of time, and we're still learning. A couple of observations that were made already. The Imam was talking about individual younger people who are connecting to issues rather than their house of worship kind of being the conduit to address those issues. That's I'm not an expert on it, but that's certainly fundraising 101, right? Is making that individual connection to the person. People don't give to they don't give to institutions, they give to people. And being able to make that personal connection is crucially, it's just crucial. But we of the older generations that weren't born with cell phones in our hands, we have to try and figure out how do we do this personal connection through this technology, because for us, that's totally impersonal. For my son's generation, why are you calling me? Why didn't you text me?
Right.
Or why didn't you text me to tell me you were going to call? I'm seeing the next generation behind him, the Gen Zs, and now I guess the Gen Alpha is the 12, 13-year-olds. Their relationship with it is totally different. And if we want to reach them, sending an email, what a terrible, terrible mistake with, with certain generations. It's like, where are you from? Can you going to tell me about the Depression now? How old are you? I mean, it's just awful. But it's been a challenge. It's been a learning curve. It's also, however, I think an upside of it is it is sort of compelling us to get younger people involved in leadership roles. Because if we want to survive, we're going to have to be able to communicate with their peers. And especially post-pandemic, when everybody is like, well, I don't need to come back to the building because you're still live streaming. I'll just stay home. And I know that's across the board because on the Interfaith Council, I've talked to folks from many different denominations of many different faith traditions, and they've all said our numbers are just not back to what they were pre-pandemic. And we're struggling with that because on the one hand, we want to say we're shutting down the digital stuff and, you got to come back here and see each other in person. On the other hand, we're saying we're still reaching people who wouldn't be here. We're still reaching people who can't be here. we were live streaming before pandemic on a very kind of limited basis, and we had folks who had moved away, people who were taking care of elderly relatives, people who had gone out of the country to take care of a parent, and they were able to tune in, and they were incredibly grateful. And and if we shut that down now, we'd be cutting off that opportunity. So that's the sort of the final issue that we're dealing with, is this technology is here to stay, and people are now relying on it, and we need to be able to make it work, and we need to be able to make that the conduit for personal contact, even though it isn't. The real challenge, though, I think, is how do we take that contact and turn it into real in-person contact? And I think it's a little bit radical, maybe, but maybe not. Hearing some of the other comments, at least a part of that, and I think a significant part of it, is de-emphasizing our focus on the physical plant, and getting out of the buildings, and getting to the people. I think we've relied for a long time on saying, people will come to us, we build it, they will come. I don't know that that's the ethos anymore. I think where we're at now is, we need to get out of the building and into the community.
Mark, I want to.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
A little bit. Another issue that I think all faith communities had to deal with is, as there were religious scandals for some faith leaders across the world, the next generation has kind of lost respect for faith leaders. And, philanthropy depends totally on trust. And if we don't build that trust with this generation, we're not going to get anything. Right. So they want transparency. They want to know where the funds are going. They want to see reports. They demand, because they get that from every other institution they have to deal with. And they say, when we come to the faith community, we need to see in details, how much did it cost? Where did the money go? What kind of car is the Imam driving? Because they want to make the connections. And to rebuild that trust, it's important for us to be transparent, to provide more feedback to the donors. And also, overall, this generation is expecting us to be aware of what's going on, what else is going on in the world, and not to, when they come to the service and think, you're only concerned about yourself, you're selfish. There's so many other things that you need to address. And therefore, speaking to issues and allowing and encouraging them to go out and give to other nonprofits locally and nationally and internationally is part of this rebuilding this relationship with this generation.
Yeah, I think under all of your religious umbrellas, there is activity, there's philanthropy activity helping people who are not part of your faiths, which is a really important thing. And I think something not everybody in communities understands, right? People don't always know that Catholic Charities doesn't just serve Catholics, and that Jewish Family Services doesn't just serve Jews. And I think that gets lost sometimes in the process.
95% of the clients for the Muslim social services are not Muslim. And that's the reality. But now, as faith leaders, we have to think creatively of how to bridge the gap. And so there are services like classes or counseling or other things that we begin to charge fees for, and or we have to list the maintenance budget for our buildings for the community and say, this is one option, for you if you want to contribute to.
Yeah.
And because there is a cost center here. And so instead of just give us a general donation and let us apply it where we like, no, we have to give them these options for them to choose.
Yeah, that's something the entire nonprofit sector has been wrestling with for a long time now. Rabbi, back to your point earlier, I do continual research on the generational cohorts, and each year we update that research and present it to the community so people can kind of see the differences, not just in giving, but in generally how they live. And 2 years ago, AT&T shared data that more than 60% of their phone users, their cell phone users below the age of 30, never activate their voicemail because they have no intention of returning your call, right? They don't want to get a message from you so you can call them back and leave a message for them, right? That whole process is complicated. So one of the things that pandemic did well for a lot of the nonprofit sector was remove geographical borders, right? So if you're in a geography where people come to you and now you have the ability to reach beyond that geography digitally, then that's a way to actually expand. You just have to be able, to the Imam's point, to build the trust to be able to do that. And to your point earlier, have the ability to have some content that is relevant to them so that they'll come and spend time with you.
Yeah, and if I could just jump in for a second, you all are sharing your insights, which are so present when matching the research that we have as well. Our research shows about 68% of Floridians are giving dollars to formal charities of some sort, which includes, religious institutions and that. About a little over half the population is volunteering, but 87% of Floridians are giving what we've called informal giving. So they're giving items, they're giving directly to other individuals in needs, whether they know them or whether they're strangers. And so being able to connect Floridians with the opportunity to give things that they have access to. The other thing that we know is that the only true great predictors of whether someone's going to give or not is household income, their religiosity, whether their religion, and to some degree their age, because we do know as people get older, they tend to give more. The things that do not matter in whether they give or not are things like race, ethnicity, how long they've lived in Florida. Those are not indicators of whether someone is likely to give or not. And so I think it's actually very empowering to not have to think about those barriers or treat that as a way that we need to filter people through. All Floridians are interested in being generous in some way. And it's just a matter of us as institutions being able to match what they're looking for and giving them that opportunity to connect.
And I think one of the thank you. I'm writing some of that down. That's really important. Something that faith communities and worldview communities have an opportunity to do and are uniquely positioned to do is to mobilize people power as well. I mean, we just celebrated Martin Luther King Day, and we know that faith communities were so crucial in the civil rights movement in the 1960s. That was how large numbers of people were motivated and activated. I want to make a quick shout out to on Monday at the Great Day of Service, the Orange County and the City of Orlando and U.S. Hunger did the Million Meals Pack. And I had an opportunity to be there and be in, an exhibition hall with 1,000 volunteers on 3 shifts who ended up packing 1 million meals. Many of those were groups from houses of worship or from worldview organizations who came and said, we have an obligation to the community. So the people power, the sort of in-person kind of thing, in addition to in-kind and actual material gifts, is crucial, and that's an area that faith communities have a lot of influence in and can really leverage that to make our community better.
That's another really important element, that future givers are more likely to give if they volunteered when they were young. People without volunteer experience don't become philanthropists just because they have money. Yeah.
I think also when we talk about, I want to go back for a moment and speak to something the Imam said about the scandals. I think that as faith leaders, we cannot really do anything about those that have fallen short. And in today's time with social media, it is just blasted across, and all of our different people will see that. And of course, they form an opinion. But the Bible says that steady plotting leads to prosperity. So as a leader, we have to be constant, and they have to have a trust in their leader, their local leader. And I think that when they have a connection with their local leader, then their giving to the institution continues. It may require a few more questions. It may require just a closer look. But at the end of the day, you know what? I'm here. I trust my pastor. I trust my rabbi, my imam. I know that they would not lead me into a space that would not bring prosperity and health to all of us. I also wanted to mention the whole notion of getting the donor or the philanthropist involved. In this day and time, I'm noticing that they don't just want to write a check. They actually want to be a part. And it's not because they don't trust the institution. It's that their heart has grown and they really feel the need to give back and to roll up their sleeves and be involved. And so we try to give those people who would give those significant gifts, if you will, that may not even be a part of our ministry, an opportunity to give back, be a part, and to put in some sweat equity. And it has made a big difference over the years.
That's good.
I agree with that. What you said, Mark, earlier about they have to start volunteering. So one of our strategies is to draw people in. And I made many, many times this statement, before you give me any dollar, I want you to give me some of your time. And because once we get them in and they see for themselves the struggle and the importance of the effort, and then they feel like, okay, and I can financially contribute on top of my time. And sometimes they say, I can't give you the time, but I'm going to give you the money now that I know that I've been on the inside. Right. And that is crucial to have their buy-in.
Well, that's when they start to empathize and they say, you know what, let me give you this donation so I can have back my time.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. At the foundation, we always talk about philanthropists having a head, a heart, and a wallet, and you have to actually touch all three of those. People who just give without a heart or a head in the game may give once and not again. Everyone's got a head, so there's plenty of criticism, right? There's plenty of people who will analyze and tell you there's a better way to do it, and they know what it is. And if you only have a heart, then you'll tend to give without really thinking about outcome or impact further on. But if you put all three of those together, that's when you get people who bring their intellect, their money, and they're on the bus with you. They really want to change something. They want to make something work. And that's an important part of keeping people in that investment space. I want to bring Nicole Donelson back in. She's been tracking questions, and let her finish us up here with any questions, additional questions she may have collected for you. Nicole, welcome back.
Thank you. This has been such a fabulous conversation so far, and I think you all have kind of touched on some of the items that were submitted as questions. Something that the Imam mentioned was about the desire for individuals who are maybe a part of the younger generation to give to some of these bigger crises. And I think something that perhaps is not always common knowledge is the significant role that oftentimes different faith institutions play in helping to address those needs in the communities. Do you think there's any sort of adjustment or approach that needs to be made in terms of kind of helping to communicate the impact that these faith institutions have in addressing some of these crises that are taking place?
Well, knowing that people have access to information and online, they know our role becomes filtering for them the best nonprofits that they can connect with and give them recommendations and say, if you care about climate change, here is 1, 2, 3 nonprofits that focus on that. If you care about, African wildlife, this is where you go. If you care about homelessness, here where you go, and so on. So our role becomes a mediator to, so they don't go on their own and to scammers and lose a lot of money and come back and say, but you didn't offer me advice or you didn't give me a channel. So we say we have our needs, these are our needs, help us meet them. And here's other channels for different things that you may care about and that we would recommend. These are like partners, like locally, we say Second Harvest Food Bank, if you want to help fight hunger in the community. So if you give them this menu, let them choose. You did the verification, you do the auditing, you ask the questions on their behalf, and then you say, this nonprofit, is up to par and you can safely deal with them.
I think there's one other aspect. I'm going to take a little bit different tack on this and echo something that the Imam was talking about when he was, talking about having to build trust. Being able to ask questions. That seems to be something that certainly, our millennial and his cohorts and the generation behind them as well that I taught and mentored. They want to be able to ask questions and they want to get answers and they want to be able to ask difficult questions, challenging questions, and get honest answers, even if the answer is, I don't know. One of the objections that I've heard from younger generations and their experiences with their houses of worship in particular is I don't get answers and I feel like I can't ask questions or I get formulaic answers. I don't want to, not calling out anybody by name or denomination, but most often what I would hear is, I would go into my house of worship and I would say, I have this really challenging question and this terrible thing going on in my life or this terrible crisis, or I'm concerned about this thing that's happening in the world. And the answer that they get is, you just have to have faith, which you do, but that's not sufficient. And, I think if we're going to, we're going to engage folks in those subsequent generations, that's where they're at. They want to ask questions, they want to get answers, and they want to feel that it's a place to go to be able to ask those questions.
Rabbi, if I can jump in, I totally agree with you. And when that pandemic happened, whether we like it or not, we became a church in 2 locations, one in your local community and one in cyberspace. We just doubled in terms of our platform immediately. But also what we did not realize and what we're still processing is how do we communicate not only with the cyber members or the cyber environment, but also with the new generations that are coming up so quickly. I've discovered that I don't speak Gen Z language. As gifted as I want to believe I am, I thank God for my kids. I thank God for those people who will pull me to the sideline and say, Bishop, what you're saying is not connecting with the people in the chairs. Let me give you a quick analogy. I was preaching one day and I was talking about this particular Sunday was Dress Down Sunday, and I was wearing tennis shoes. And my kids just about crawled under the chairs. They just had a fit. They called for a conference right after service. They said, "Come here, Dad, let me show you. Those are not tennis shoes." I said, "Well, what are they?" They said, "Those are sneakers." I said, "Oh my God." And said, "And don't ever embarrass us again and get up there and call sneakers tennis shoes." My point is, I have had to rethink my ability to communicate to multi-generations. So we have been very intentional about not only involving more of them, but also welcoming them to the leadership platform so that they can address those hard subjects that I'm programmed to give a formulated response because I don't speak their language. And so we just brought on a young man to help us, particularly our millennials and Gen X, Gen Zs and Gen X, to really be able to talk to them because he speaks their language. And I believe that as we continue to move forward in the future, we have to listen. If they want to give the climate change, if they want to give to the whales or to the wildlife, then maybe we ought to be a little more open and bring those platforms in place so that we can provide the guidance, so that we connect with where they are.
I love that. I love that. Thank you so much. I do want to acknowledge clearly that the panel was not able to include, every faith institution that's out there, every religion. But I think we know that giving back, giving of your time, giving of your talent, giving of from your wallet is something that is a part of a value element that carries throughout. And we thank you for sharing that. I do want to make sure too, Leah, I know that you've referred to some great reports. Would you mind just kind of sharing briefly? We'll include this in follow-up, but how people might be able to find that information?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you go to Florida Nonprofit Alliance's website, which is flnonprofits.org, we have a research section. So we have 3 reports about individual giving that are on there. I was quoting from Growing Generosity and Giving in Florida. We also do an annual kind of check-in with the sector. So our 2023 nonprofit survey, it's going to be released in February. So I would encourage you all to check back for that or join us for the release of that on February 8th. And happy to answer any questions that you all have afterwards about that. You can find my information on the website as well, flnonprofits.org. Perfect.
Thank you. And we'll include that too. We'll be sending out a recording of this in an email and we'll have it available on our website. We'll make sure to also include links to those reports and information that Leah shared. In the meantime, also, if you would like to register for our next and final call in the series, which will be taking place on April 17th, it's going to be the role of philanthropy in politics. And they say don't ever talk about religion and politics, but we thought this could be fun. So I hope that everyone has enjoyed their experience and thank you for joining us today. I'm submitting the link to register in the chat. Thank you to our amazing panelists for this great discussion and wish you all a wonderful day.